this final session to have your Bible handy if you have it with you or on your phone or something, because we're going to be referencing several scriptures and Proverbs in just a little bit. If you think back just for a minute to that final session and that final chart that I shared with you, if we had hours upon hours upon hours, we would really take this chart and we would elaborate on how we go about doing these things very specifically. Like, how do you go about, particularly like in the teen years, how do you go about building trust and building relationship? How do you go about helping them internalize instruction, develop independence? How do you build friendship with your children into the adult years? Even in some of the other areas, specifically the childhood years, how do you go about helping to develop their character and helping them develop responsibility? I wish we had time to address all of these things very specifically. I'll say this, I'll be pointing out some resources for you at the end. Because we only have 3 hours, we can't do that, right? I remind you that this is just designed to whet your appetite, introduce you to some stuff, also introduce you to some resources that can be available to you. But one of the things we are going to do right now in this final session is to take at least 0 to 5 and talk very specifically about how we go about establishing parental authority. And how do we focus properly on discipline? What is discipline? What is it not? And try to help you practically, at least in one area. And I think this is a stage where a lot of you are at right now. And so I think this will be hopefully helpful. And then I'll point you to some other resources that can carry you along into some of the other stages of development. The introduction to this particular session says it's essential to think of the practice of discipline in connection with the term shepherding. Please do not separate these two words. Do not think of discipline as being independent of shepherding. It is a component of our shepherding. Okay? I also think it's very helpful to think of the word discipline in terms of discipleship. If you're around the life of a church at all, you've heard that word before, that we are attempting to disciple people in their relationship with the Lord. Now, the word discipline and the word discipleship are not exactly the same. They sound similar, and I think they work in conjunction and harmony with each other to some degree. As it says in your notes, discipline and discipleship are not the same thing. Parental discipline, done correctly, will serve as a form of discipleship. What is discipleship? Discipleship is helping somebody become a follower of Jesus. And if we do our discipline correctly, we are going to help our children become a follower of Jesus. So in this session, I want to explore what the Bible has to say about disciplining children. So by way of reminder, it's important to remember that establishing authority is the primary goal of the first 5 years of a child's life, and heart training is the primary goal of 6 to 12. Both of these goals are part of the shepherding activity of parenting, and the primary book in the Bible that provides wisdom with regard to understanding biblical discipline is Proverbs. You heard me say it earlier, I'm going to say it again now. The New Testament is relatively silent with regard to the issue of discipline. I mean, you have Ephesians 6, bring your children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, and there is meaning packed into those two words, but there's just not a lot in the New Testament. And so we go back to the Old Testament, we find a significant amount of information in the book of Proverbs with regard to this particular subject. And as we read the book of Proverbs, I think you're going to notice two primary forms of shepherding. And I think both of these ideas and concepts are very significant. One is what I would call formative instruction. When I use that phrase, I'm talking about primarily the use of our words, formative instruction, communication, the use of our language, the use of our words. And then there's the other concept that we call corrective discipline, which we'll find out in just a minute has a physical component to it as well. Okay? Now, I would argue, I think it's fun. This might just be me. I know Alex would think this is fun as well, but maybe nobody else in the room would. I think it's fun to think about how the structure of a book of the Bible teaches us some things about what we learn in that particular book. I think one of the things that's instructive about Proverbs is that the majority of it is what I would call formative instruction. That's the majority of the book. It's a father using words to teach, to instruct his son. You're going to see my son language frequently throughout the book of Proverbs. However, Proverbs is not silent about corrective discipline. It's actually the only place in the Bible where we really actually have specific language about corrective discipline. However, it's not the predominant form of shepherding that you see as you look at the structure of the book. The predominant form of shepherding is formative instruction. But we're going to talk about both. And I want you to think about this. I'm going to read, and you can follow along with me. I want us to think about Proverbs 1, 10 to 19 as an example of formative instruction. Listen to what the father is doing with his son. Verse 9. I'll start with verse 8. I put 10 to 19, but I'm going to actually start in verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason, like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole. Like those who get down to the pit, we shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your feet from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain a net is spread in the sight of any bird, but those men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Now, there's a lot in there, but do you catch the sense of what the father is doing? The father is using words to instruct. What do you hear? What kind of instruction do you hear from that text? There's multiple kinds. And anything that comes to your mind. Shepherding. When he says, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. What's he doing? He's coaching. I would even use a stronger word. He's warning his son not to go down that path, right? And then he kind of describes what they're doing. Anything else that you hear or see in that text? So there's shepherding, there's coaching, there's warning, there's discipline, there's verbal correction going on here.
Pleading.
There's pleading, right? He's pleading with his son, don't go this way. There's also teaching, right? Look at the end. Verse 19, such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. What's he doing? He's teaching his son about the path that this is going to lead him on, right? I mean, just think about all the formative instruction that happens just in that one text. And that's just the opening main section of the book of Proverbs. That's what Proverbs is like. And as you continue to read, constantly you're going to see him say, my son, pay attention, listen, here's my instruction. It's all over the book of Proverbs. Formative instruction. Then I want you to go to Proverbs 23, Now this is the part that you may not like. I'm sorry, I'll just tell you right up front, but it's in the Bible and we have to wrestle with it. There are several times in the book of Proverbs where the subject of corrective discipline comes up, what I might say physical correction. Proverbs 23 verses 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. Okay, we can be on board with that. But the next statement, if you strike him with a rod, he will not die. Now, he could, right? I mean, if you, depends what kind of rod you use and how much you use it. But there's a principle here, right? The principle is, don't buy into this idea that somehow if you, I'm going to use the forbidden word, spank your child, that it's going to kill him. It's not. If you strike him, verse 14, with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol, from death. And so that's not the only verse in Proverbs that talks about corrective discipline. There's about 6 or 7 of them scattered throughout the book that specifically address this particular issue. And so we're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to talk about formative instruction as we wrap up our seminar for today. Look at your notes. Discipline is presented as a non-negotiable in the life of a child. If you think a child does not need discipline, boy, we need to have a conversation very quickly after we're done, okay? It's a non-negotiable. Proverbs 29 verse 15 says, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. I've already quoted that verse several times. Proverbs 29:17 says, discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. You can see the extremes painted for us here, right? Don't discipline, it's going to bring shame. Discipline, and you're going to have rest and delight. Discipline at its heart is designed by God to be corrective, not punitive. This is so important for us to understand. We use the word punishment. We just have to be careful how we use the word punishment. If we're using it in a punitive sense, where we're getting back at our children for the way that they're treating us as a parent, that's wrong. It's designed by God to be corrective. As a matter of fact, this is in harmony with what God does with us, isn't it? There's passage in Proverbs, there's also a passage in Hebrews 12 that speaks about the discipline of the Lord, and the very fact the writer of Hebrews says that God would discipline you suggests something about you, right? It suggests that you belong to him, that you're his child. And the writer of Hebrews says to us, if there is no discipline, you ought to be scared, because that's a sign that you do not belong to the Lord. He doesn't discipline those who don't belong to him. So discipline is actually a sign of love. And so God is encouraging us to do with our children what he does with us. It's in line with his own practice. It has the goal of restoration, not payback. As we consider biblical discipline, it's important to keep this particular truth in mind. I think this is an important statement. I would encourage you to mark it. Whatever you use to control behavior is ultimately what is going to shape the heart of your child. If you use manipulation to control the behavior of your children, that is what's going to come out at some point in their life. Whatever you use to control behavior is ultimately going to shape the heart of your child, and what ultimately shapes the heart of a child is what is going to dictate their behavior, since the heart determines behavior. This is kind of this vicious cycle, isn't it? Whatever you use is going to shape their heart, and whatever shapes their heart is going to produce their behavior. It's going to go like this. It's also important to remember that as you discipline your children, think about it this way. Yes, in one sense, you stand above them as the one that God has called to discipline and correct, right? You are the authority. They are not. So in one sense, you stand above your child in the discipline. However, you also stand beside them as a fellow sinner who struggles with your own heart, right? You're both. I am an authority, but I am not innocent. I have my own struggles. And I cannot come to the discipline of my children just with this view of God put me in charge. Yes, God put me in charge while I'm struggling with my own issues in my own heart as well. That's going to frame the way that you discipline. I promise me it will. All right, now I want to consider what the Bible says about corrective discipline. Let's start there, and let's move then on to formative instruction. Underneath number 1, it says this: while there are several forms of discipline that may qualify as corrective, what I mean by that is I don't want to suggest that the only kind of corrective discipline is physical. There are some other ways that we can implement corrective discipline. I want to focus, though, on this particular issue. The focus of this portion of our study is going to be on the biblical concept called the rod. Now, that's a scary word. It sounds ominous. It sounds dangerous. But we'll get very specific about that in just a little bit. First of all, I want us to think about what the book of Proverbs says about the rod. Okay? So go with me if you have your Bible. We're gonna breeze through some verses. I'm gonna read them, and then in your notes I put a statement that kind of either summarizes what the verse is suggesting, or even quotes a portion of the verse, just so you have some basic information in front of you. Proverbs 13, verse 24. I'm sure you've heard this one before. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. What is this verse saying to us? You got to chew on this. You got to wrestle with this. If you spare the rod, you hate your son. Now, you might not like that, but that's what it says. We got to deal with that. Okay? Keep going. Proverbs 22, verse 15. Folly, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Did you know that? Yeah, I've seen that. You've seen that. You know this. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child. But, look at this, the rod of discipline drives it far from him. So I put there in your notes, the rod is designed by God to be a heart-shaping instrument. That's interesting to me. Next verse is Proverbs 23, 13, and 14, which I just read, so I'm not going to reread it. But what do we learn in those verses where he says if you strike him with the rod, you're not going to kill him? You're actually going to rescue his soul. The rod is a life-giving instrument. It's not only a heart-shaping instrument, it's a life-giving instrument, which, when, here's the key, used, what? Properly, it will not damage a child. I can stand in front of you and say, I got spanked when I was little. I think I'm okay. I'm not sure. Like, I live to tell about it. I at least live to tell about it, okay?
Unless you're a ghost.
What's that? Unless I'm a ghost, yeah, or an avatar or something like that, right? I am AI. Impersonated, right? No, really. I'm a live person standing in front of you who experienced spanking and lived to tell about it. Proverbs 29, verse 15. Thank you, Mom and Dad, by the way, if you're watching this video. Thank you. I deserve every single one of them. Proverbs 29, 15. The rod and reproof. You see, here's a combination of corrective discipline and formative instruction. Do you see that? The rod and reproof. I just lost my place. What verse am I in? 15. There it is. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. If we had time, which we don't, I put there at the bottom also just to consider other verses in Proverbs that speak about discipline but don't include the word rod with it. Okay, I just put those there for your reference. I want to, the weight of those verses I make this statement at the very bottom. The book of Proverbs clearly advocates for the use of the rod as part of the disciplinary development of children. Notice a couple of those words. It advocates for it. I think we take into context the fact that this is wisdom literature. This is the author suggesting to us that this is a wise way for you to live as a parent. And I would also say another key word is that it's part of the disciplinary development of children. It is not the full weight of the disciplinary. It should not be the only tool in your tool bag, so to speak. It's one of the tools in your tool bag, but not the only one. Corrective discipline and formative instruction. Top of the next page. So what is this rod that we're talking about? How should we think about it? Well, I love this definition. This was so helpful to me. I've taken it out of this particular book called Shepherding a Child's Heart, and I would encourage you to think about the rod this way. The rod is actually a parent. That's an interesting way to think about it. In faith toward God and faithfulness toward his or her children, undertaking the responsibility, notice these words, of careful, timely, measured, and controlled use of physical punishment to underscore the importance of obeying God, thus rescuing the child from continuing in his foolishness until death. I think that's a really helpful definition. It's a little long, but it's really helpful. And I think all of the words in there are very important. So I want to break them down very quickly for you. Number one, the parent. The use of the rod is to be administered in the context of the protection of a parent-child relationship. That's important. It's not a weapon that we use. It's within the context of our relationship with our children. Number two, it is by faith. It is done out of obedience to God's word, whether we like it or not, or understand how it works, or whether we actually see it working or not. And I can say this to you. I had children who it worked very well with, and children who it didn't seem to work very well with at all. My daughter in particular. She was a tough one. And she knows it, so I'm not saying anything that she doesn't know already. Whereas I had other children who, seriously, like my oldest son, you could just look at him and he would, the tears would start to flow. I'm like, why am I even spanking this child? It's like, okay. So every kid's different, right? Whether it's working or not, whether we like it or not, this is something I do by faith because it's in the book. Number three, faithfulness. It's an expression of love and commitment to a child. Remember, discipline is a sign of love, not something negative. I mean, it can have negative ramifications to it if it's not done well, but it's actually a sign of love. Number four, responsibility. This is not the parent deciding to punish the child, but determining to fulfill their God-given role and responsibility. I think that's a very important way to think about this. Number five, those words, careful, timely, measured, control. This is not a time of venting anger or frustration. And can I just be this practical to you? If your child has disobeyed you, we're going to talk about this in just a second, like how we actually go about this. If your child has disobeyed you and you're angry or you're frustrated, you better not do anything about it immediately, other than set yourself apart from them for a little bit and get your own act together first before you do something that's going to create damage in the relationship to your child. The fact that we would implement corrective discipline does not mean that it has to happen immediately. Number six, it is physical. It is applied physically. I will talk about that more in just a minute. Number seven, it is rescuing to the child. It's designed as a rescue operation from self-destructive choices. That's how it's presented in those verses in Proverbs. Okay? So, the biblical term rod, this is the next sentence, is specifically advocating for the use of physical correction, not simply suggesting an environment of discipline. There are some people who want to So generalize this idea of rod that just, I just can kind of have this environment in my home where my kids know that they're expected to do what I tell them to do. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think this is a very specific word that's used, and I think it actually has to do with physical correction. However, not all discipline should be done with a rod. The more general term discipline would allow for some other forms of correction, although it's often used in the context of the rod. It's important to consider in what situations the use of the rod is encouraged. So, for example, we read Proverbs 22, verse 15. I want to go back there for just a second. In Proverbs 22, 15, it says at the beginning of the verse that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. So, what does that indicate about a time in which the rod is necessary? When a child is demonstrating what? Foolishness. Does that make sense? So we have to think about the context in which we're using this as we read through these verses. Proverbs 29, verse 15 said, we looked at this before, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. So a child is kind of just doing his own thing, is going to need some correction. And he might need the rod and reproof. He might just need the rod. He never just needs the rod. He always needs reproof. But he sometimes might just need reproof and not the rod. It just depends on the situation. What I'm suggesting is the rod is necessary, but it's not necessary all the time. It takes wisdom to discern whether it's an appropriate time or not for this. Next section here. While the use of the rod is clearly encouraged in Proverbs, there are some misuses of the rod that must be avoided. Number one, this would be wrong to use the rod as a right to unleash unbridled temper or vindictive anger. James chapter 1, verse 20 is a very convicting verse to me when I think it's not about parenting, but it says a lot to me about parenting. Where James says, the anger of man is not producing the righteousness of God. You know that verse? You should know that verse. The anger of man is not producing the righteousness of God. If I am angry at my children when I'm correcting them, that is not going to produce the righteousness of God in their life. It's not. It's going to produce anger. So do not think that it's okay to discipline your children in anger. And they might stop what they're doing. Their behavior might change, but their heart is not going to change if you're disciplining them out of anger. Secondly, it would be a misuse of the rod to use it as a right to hit a child whenever you want. Thirdly, it would be a misuse of the rod to vent your frustration with your children. And fourth, it would be wrong to use the rod as payback or payment for wrongdoing. There's other things we could talk about, but we're going to keep moving on. Since specific instruction is not provided in Proverbs on how to go about using the rod, the following is being provided as a wise approach to using the rod in corrective discipline. This is where I'm trying to be as practical as I possibly can be. How do you go about doing this? You notice I'm using the word rod a lot. I'm not using the word spanking. The word spanking kind of has a negative connotation, but that's what I'm talking about, okay? Just for video purposes, the rod sounds a little better than the word spanking. How do you go about doing this in a way that is corrective, not punitive? Very, very practically speaking. Number one, choose an instrument that will produce pain but not injury. We are not trying to hurt our children. So don't pick something that's going to hurt them. Pick something that is going to inflict pain. If it doesn't inflict pain, it doesn't mean anything. God's judgment on sin is not painless. And you heard me say it earlier, right? That one of the reasons we discipline is because we want our children to understand that sin has consequences and that it could lead to eternal destruction. And so it's important that we inflict pain. And there's something about the pain that is instructive. I don't pretend to know how it all works, but it is. So choose an instrument that will produce pain but not injury. I wish we could talk a little bit more about that. I would just say something that has no flexibility in it is dangerous. I mean, if you're using something like this thick and it has no bend to it, that potentially could do some serious damage. So you got to be careful with that. Something that's a little wider, that spreads it out a little bit better, is probably a little bit better than something that's like this, but that's just my opinion. Number 2, that's very practical. Take your child to a private place. You should not discipline your children in public. Number 1, you get yourself in a lot of trouble for doing it in public. And by the way, the fact that you could get in trouble for spanking your children doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But you have to be wise about this, please. And I would encourage you not to, your children shouldn't be out there talking about this either. That's not wise. It doesn't mean we're hiding something. I mean, if you're hiding abuse, that's a problem. But if you're trying to be quiet about biblical corrective discipline, that's probably a good thing in our culture today. The other thing is, you don't want to embarrass them in front of other people. So take them to a private place. Number 3, this is where the formative instruction comes alongside of the rod. Tell them specifically what they have done and seek acknowledgement from them of what they have done. Now, again, your ability to do this with them when they're very little is complicated. The older they get, the more conversation you will have. When they're little, you'll have less conversation. And I'll talk about timing of all this in just a minute. But you should not just spank them without having a talk about why they're being spanked. Number 4, remind them of the purpose of corrective discipline. Remind them that you love them, and because you love them. Now, they're not going to believe that in the moment, right? I mean, yeah, I see Julian shaking her head and laughing at you. Like, no, my kids didn't. I said that to my kids all the time, and they're like, sure, Dad. Right? I understand. They're not going to believe you in the moment, but hopefully that's true. You're doing it because you love them, and because you want what's best for them. Number 5. Oh, the famous line, "This hurts me more than it hurts you." Yeah, that's just not true. I don't know who thought of that one, but it's just not true. Number 5, let them know how many, this is kind of a funny word, swats, I couldn't think of a better word, they will receive. They should know, and you should know. It indicates that you're under control when you're doing this. And that you're just not going boom, 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 boom until you finally calm down, or until they cry or weep or say they're sorry or whatever. It should be a specific number. And I would say it doesn't have to be a lot either.
You can do the choice how many it's worth.
I don't know about that. I got to think about that one.
Negotiate.
-1, Dad. -1. Number 6. Again, I'm trying to be really practical here. You got to make sure their clothing is not going to stifle the impact of the discipline. Okay? I mean, if they're still wearing a diaper, guess what? Diapers are thick. Nappy, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking American nappy. If it's thick and you're trying to inflict a little pain, it's going to be really difficult. Okay? Now, I'm not advocating for bare bottom either, but I am advocating for there not being too much back there. There's already enough back there, right? The clothes don't need to add to it. Number 7, following the discipline. Hold them. Hug them. Assure them of your love. Encourage their pursuit of forgiveness. Pray with them. It's so important at the end that you try to restore the relationship, because there's a fracture, right? If they have disobeyed, there's a fracture in the relationship in that moment between you as the parent and them as the child. That's why they're being corrected. But the goal is correction, right? It's not punishment. It's not punitive. It's corrective. So bring them back into relationship with you by hugging them, telling them that you love them, pray with them, okay? So corrective discipline here's where it comes to the timing, all right? And if you have practical questions about this after we're done, I'm happy to take them. I just got to watch my time. Corrective discipline should begin as early as a child has a capacity to understand what they are being asked to do and should continue on an as-needed basis, likely into the early childhood years. I'll just say this. If you do a good job with this, you will notice that as they get older, there's less. Okay? Now, we can have debates and discussions about how early this should start, but I'm convinced of this. Your children know far sooner than you think they might know what you expect them to do. If you start too late with this, it's going to really be a problem and a struggle with them. So they're smarter than we might give them credit for. Don't underestimate how much they understand. Okay? That's all I'll say about that for right now. I would also say this. If you're still trying to use the rod at 12, 13, 14, 15, you're going to have all kinds of problems. That's in my estimation, it's way too old. Okay? That's why we're talking about 0 to 5. It doesn't mean that once they turn 6, 7, or 8 that they might not still need it every once in a while, but again, they should need it less at 6, 7, and 8 than they did at 0 to 5, for sure. Number 2, let's talk about quickly formative instruction. As you read through the book of Proverbs, you're going to notice that the majority of the book is formative instruction. The father is attempting to impart wisdom, instruction, understanding, knowledge, and guidance to his son. That's really what he says in Proverbs 1, verses 1 through 7. That's what he tells him that he's doing. I'm writing this to you to provide all of these things for you. And it's being done through verbal instruction. There are various forms of formative instruction that are found in the book of Proverbs that a wise parent will use to help shepherd their child. I've just listed some of them. Rules. Your children need rules. They help define boundaries. Boundaries are so important. You know what? When we lived at that house where we lived in the United States before we moved here, it was important that my children knew the boundary at the end of our driveway. Right? Because there was danger out in the middle of that road. I never knew when there was going to be a car flying up the road. And so we created boundaries with our children. Boundaries are actually indicators that you love, not that you're trying to restrain. And we should think about that even when it comes to God's word. God did not give us boundaries because he's some cosmic killjoy who doesn't want us to have any fun. He gave us boundaries because he knows what's best for us as simple human beings. And our children need boundaries. They need rules. Number 2, another form of formative instruction in Proverbs is verbal correction. It provides insight into what is wrong and how the wrong can be corrected. You know, there is such a thing as right and wrong. Number 3, encouragement. Sometimes our kids need this. Words that fill the child's heart with hope and inspire them to do what is right. Not all of our correction, our formative instruction needs to be, quote, quote, negative. It can be positive. Number 3, sometimes they need a rebuke, right? A strong censure, a stern reprimand. We saw that in Proverbs 1. My son, if sinners entice you, don't consent. It's dangerous. That would also serve as number 7, the warning, which we'll get to in just a second. Number 5, entreaty, earnest and intense pleading, urging a child to act in wisdom and faith. Now, I'm not talking about begging, but you can tell if there's something important. It's not wrong to have a sense of urgency with your children about how important this is without begging them. Please do this for Daddy. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay? Number 6, instruction. The process of imparting a lesson, precept, or information that's going to help a child to understand their world and how to live wisely in it. That was what we read at the end of that section in chapter 1, where the father told the son, such are the ways of everyone who's greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. That's instruction. He's teaching him a principle of life. And then finally, warning, putting a child on guard regarding potential danger. You're going to see all of those things throughout Proverbs. That's all part of our formative instruction, what we do with the words in our conversation with our kids. Next paragraph, for your own edification and growth as a parent, I want to encourage you to do something. Read through the book of Proverbs and look for these various approaches to formative instruction. Consider the content of the formative instruction as it relates to the type of formative instruction that's used. And I think you're going to see some interesting things. The content of the instruction is going to shape the way that the instruction is given, right? So if the father is concerned about his son maybe going down the path of the wicked, it's probably going to be stated in the form of a warning. If he's trying to teach his son a principle, it's a little softer, like we read at the end of that section in Proverbs 1. Depending on the nature of the issue, it's going to be presented in a particular way. So if you know anything about Proverbs, you know that multiple times in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, the father talks to the son about the dangers of sexual immorality. It comes up like 3 or 4 different times. And it's interesting. As you read through it, I would encourage you to look at how the father talks to him about this. Also, I would encourage you to consider the following diagram as you think about what type of formative instruction may be most effective at various stages of a child's development. I don't know if this chart makes sense, but you'll notice two terms being used there, authority and influence, right? Authority, you notice that the arrow is higher at 0, right? Because at 0, you're primarily dealing with an issue of authority with your children. Your ability to influence your children at 0 is very, very low, in the sense that, again, you don't sit there and reason with your 6-month-old. It's all about you as the parent just doing what you need to do for them. But you notice that the older they get, what you should have to use less authority, and you should be able to use more influence to guide and direct them. And what I mean, here's the difference. Authority is the right to give direction and orders and to require a certain response, whereas influence is the ability to affect behavior without having to use coercion. So with your children, if you've done a good job of establishing authority early on, by the time they get to their teen years, for the most part, you should be able to say, I'd like you to take out the rubbish bin. And you shouldn't have to say anything more than that, but out of the influence of your relationship, they should just do what they're told to do. Now, does it always work that way exactly? No, but that's kind of the idea. You shouldn't have to say at 13, 14, or 15, if you don't do it, you're going to get a spanking. No. We got problems if we still have to say that at 13, 14, 15. So authority should go this way the older our kids get, and our influence should go this way with them. That's what we should be targeting. Okay? And the different forms of formative instruction are going to change as the ages of our kids change as well. So I would encourage you, as you read through Proverbs, to think through those things. I would say that the instruction one that you see up above, this process of imparting lessons, that's probably going to become more prevalent the older your children are getting. Early on, you're going to be doing some other things more so than when they're older. Like, you're going to have lots of rules at the early stages, maybe less rules the older they get. Just some things to think about. In conclusion, I've got 1 minute to honor the time that we said we were going to be done. In closing, I just want to encourage you to consider the benefit of a few resources. I've already shown you these two. They're both written by the same guy. This one is written by, some of you know the name Paul Tripp. This is his brother Ted. And this was his first book, Shepherding the Heart of a Child, which has a lot of very, very helpful principles regarding this shepherding concept and some specific help at various stages of development. So this was his second book that kind of builds off of this first volume. He wrote it in conjunction with his wife, Margie. Both of these books are available in our new church library, which most of you don't even know about, but it's just gotten set up in the past couple of weeks. There's a couple of extra copies of this coming, Lord willing, tomorrow. Somebody from the States was coming over and we got a couple extra copies. I wish there was a cheaper way of making these more accessible to you, but unlike some of the other books we've shared with you, these are not Crossway publications. If they were Crossway publications, we'd be able to get them for you at very discounted rates. But these will be in the library. There will be 2 sets of these in the library that you can check out, use, read, put back. If you really, really, really would like to own your own copy of this, we can have a conversation about how we might be able to get a real copy in your hands for you to keep. Just let me know and I'll make a plan for that as well. The other book that I don't have in front of me that's going to be in the library as well is one by Paul Tripp. He wrote a book called Parenting, 14 Gospel Principles That Can Radically Change Your Family. I would highly recommend that as well. And then a couple of podcasts. I talked to you about this one. There's a podcast called Thinking in Public. I just think that podcast will be instructive to you in general on a lot of different topics. But there's a specific one that I just listened to called The Clash of Parenting and Social Media in a Digital Age. It's a conversation with a lady named Claire Morell. She's written a book on the subject of the influence of social media with children. If at a minimum, I would really, really encourage you to listen to that podcast and understand what's going on in the social media world. Do not be ignorant about this. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not here to tell you what to do as parents. I am here to say, be informed. Social media is not as innocent as you think it might be, or as it once was. It's just not. And there are people who know about it and have written about it and talk about it, which is very, very insightful and helpful. I would also encourage you, another podcast called Counseling Talk. There's a conversation with a man named Stuart Scott where he talks about wayward children, and that's instructive and helpful. But one of the things that he did in that podcast a little bit is talk about some of the goals that we have with our children. And I think it was in that podcast that he raised the question about whether or not the salvation of our children should be a goal of ours. It was very insightful. And I walked away from the podcast thinking, that's interesting, because I think I would have said at one point that was a goal of mine. And again, going back to what we believe about God and His sovereignty, I actually think some of these other goals that we've talked about will help in that direction without making that specific thing a goal. Because then you're making a goal something that you can't accomplish in the life of your children. It's pretty fascinating, okay? And my closing statement is this. May God give you grace, wisdom, strength, and endurance. You're going to need endurance to bring your children up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. I'll pray. If you have questions, I'm happy to stay. But thanks for coming today. It's great to have you. Father, we love you. We thank you that you love us. Thank you that you discipline us. I thank you that you've also given us formative instruction in your word. And Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom as parents to know how to raise our children to the glory of God. I thank you for each one here that's here today. May you encourage them in their task, or would you give them hope as they anticipate what is coming in this regard? Help us never to be people that are hopeless in parenting. We don't have to be. You've given us your word. You are able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we could ask or think. And so we rest in that. We hope in that. We thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.